What if reality had an architectural evil twin? A place where your worst memories don't just haunt you, they build the walls around you. Everyone is talking about A24's new psychological puzzle box, Backrooms. It just shattered box office expectations, pulling in over $38 million on day one. And the internet is absolutely losing its mind over how a 20-year-old YouTuber named Kane Parsons just walked into Hollywood and completely changed the landscape of modern horror. But guys, if you think this movie is just about walking through yellow corridors and running from monsters, you are completely missing the point. This isn't just a creepypasta adaptation. It's a devastating, deeply symbolic masterclass in psychological collapse, middle-age regret, and the physical architecture of trauma. Today, we are doing a massive, hyper-detailed breakdown of this film. We're digging into the dialogue, the chilling thematic underpinnings, the brilliant performances, and specifically 5 backbone scenes that uncover the pitch-black psychology of this script. Lock your doors, turn down your brightness, and let's decode Backrooms. Warning, spoilers ahead. Okay, ready? Let's go. 1. The narrative architecture and script detail. Let's talk about the setup, because screenwriter Will Sudick does something deeply unconventional. The film is explicitly set in June 1990 in Santa Clara, California. Our protagonist, Clark, played with an agonizing leaden fatigue by Chiwetel Ejiofor, is a brilliant but failed architect. He's a functioning alcoholic, recently divorced, and deeply bitter. To survive, he manages a depressing, cavernous discount retail space called Captain Clark's Ottoman Empire. To make matters worse, he has to do these humiliating local TV commercials dressed as a literal pirate, completely aware of how pathetic he looks. The script establishes that Clark is so broke he's secretly living inside his own showroom, sleeping on a display mattress. He seeks help from Dr. Mary Klein, played by the mesmerizing Renata Reinsve. Mary is a gentle therapist who sells her own self-help audio cassettes, but she's running from her own ghosts, specifically childhood trauma involving a schizophrenic mother who used to lock them inside a claustrophobic apartment. The dialogue in these early therapy scenes is razor sharp. Clark describes his life not as a tragedy, but as a design flaw. There's a line where he looks at Mary and says, "An architect builds spaces for people to belong. But I look at my life, Mary, and I don't see any doors." That line is the entire movie in microcosm. When Clark discovers 3 weird, angled, disconnected breaker switches in his store's fuse box, it leads him to a literal slit in the basement wall. He steps through, no clips out of reality, and enters the backrooms, an infinite, surreal state of snapshots of distorted reality. 2. The cast and the visionary. Before we dissect the scenes, we have to talk about how Kane Parsons directs his actors. Chiwetel Ejiofor gives a barnstorming performance because he plays Clark with this profound, deadpan exhaustion. When he enters the backrooms, he doesn't scream like a final girl. He walks through those damp, yellow corridors with the heavy, dragging footsteps of a man walking into his office on a Monday morning. He accepts the horror because his real life already feels like an inescapable maze. And Renata Reinsve is the absolute emotional anchor. When Mary realizes Clark has vanished and left a chilling voicemail saying he isn't coming back, she goes to the store, finds the portal, and descends into the void herself. Reinsve plays Mary not as a fearless hero, but as a woman whose professional empathy is weaponized against her. What 20-year-old Kane Parsons achieves here is astonishing. Alongside producers James Wan and Sean Levy, Parsons insisted on building a massive 30,000 square foot practical set. The scale is oppressive. His camera movements are languid, dreamlike, and deeply reminiscent of David Lynch. He lets the camera sit on a blank wall for 5 seconds too long, forcing your brain to try and find a hidden shape in the wallpaper. 3. The 5 backbone scenes and hidden meanings. Now, let's get into the real meat of the film. Let's break down the 5 essential scenes that form the structural spine of backrooms and extract their hidden meanings. Scene 1. The electrician's discovery and the angled breakers. Early in the first act, Clark brings in an electrician to investigate his store's astronomically high power bills and constantly flickering lights. The electrician pulls open a dusty metal distribution board and points out 3 brightly colored breaker switches. They are installed completely askew, cutting diagonally across the neat rows of standard switches. The electrician mumbles, "These don't connect to anything in this building. They're drawing power, but the wires just vanish into the concrete." This scene lays down the central thesis of the film's universe. The backrooms aren't a separate alien planet. They are a parasitic, extra-dimensional growth feeding directly off the infrastructure of human capitalism and failure. The angled switches symbolize a literal glitch in the design of reality. It's a visual warning that the mundane structures we trust to keep us safe, electricity, walls, foundations, are completely porous. Scene 2. The found footage expedition, the pool room collapse. After Clark survives his first brief trip into the maze, he feels completely alienated by Mary's cautious, clinical skepticism. Frustrated and desperate for validation, he recruits his assistant manager, Kat, and her boyfriend, Bobby, to help him film the space as proof. The movie suddenly shifts into jarring, claustrophobic 90s camcorder POV. They wander into a stunning, terrifying, infinite white-tiled room filled with stagnant, chest-deep pool water. As they explore, the geometry twists, separating them. We hear Kat's muffled screams through a wall, and Bobby is suddenly hunted down by a tall, skeletal, dark humanoid entity. This sequence is a masterclass in shifting perspectives, but metaphorically, it represents the danger of dragging others into your own mental illness. Clark is so consumed by his need to be believed that he blindfolds himself to the immediate danger, sacrificing the youth and innocence of Kat and Bobby to justify his own obsession. The pristine, infinite pool room represents a distorted clinical baptism, a place of faux purity that actually breeds rot and death. Scene 3. The sinking armchair and tables don't bleed. When Mary enters the backrooms to rescue Clark, she navigates a highly surreal installation art-style corridor where random items from Clark's furniture store are clipped into the geometry. She passes a hideous, floral print armchair. The camera stays in a wide, agonizingly slow tracking shot as the armchair silently, smoothly, sinks straight down into the damp, solid yellow carpet like quicksand, leaving no hole behind. Mary stops, touches the wall, and whispers a bizarre, chilling phrase to herself. "Tables don't bleed. Tables don't bleed." This is the core of the film's existential dread. The sinking armchair represents the total erosion of adulthood and domestic stability. The furniture Clark sold to give people a sense of home is being swallowed by the void. Mary's repetitive mantra, "Tables don't bleed," is a psychological grounding technique. She is desperately trying to remind herself of the boundary between inanimate objects and living organisms, because the backrooms actively blur that line. The environment is emotionally alive, absorbing the memories of those who enter and rendering them as architectural horrors. Scene 4. The dining room. Captivity and the simulacra. Mary is eventually ambushed by an unhinged, deeply broken Clark, who chokes her unconscious. When she wakes up, she is tied to a chair in a terrifying replica of a formal dining room located deep within the maze. Sitting around the table are the residents, awkward, horrifying human simulacra that resemble poorly rendered, low-polygon video game avatars. They sit completely still, staring with unblinking eyes. Clark, completely manic, tells Mary he wants to stay here because he finally feels like he belongs. Mary, utilizing her training, looks him in the eyes and says, "Clark, look around you. This isn't a home. These aren't people. You are a human being with autonomy and freedoms. You don't have to live in the spaces your failures built." This dialogue is the emotional peak of the film. Clark has entirely surrendered to his depression. He would rather live as a king among hollow, artificial replicas of humanity who can't judge him than face his real-world failures as a divorced, bankrupt architect. Mary's speech is a literal therapy session occurring in the heart of hell, trying to remind him that his identity is not defined by his surroundings. It's a tragic look at how trauma convinces people to isolate themselves in comfortable, familiar miseries. Scene 5. The arrival of Captain Clark. The climax. Moved by Mary's words, a weeping Clark steps forward to untie her, but the ambient fluorescent hum suddenly cuts out, replaced by a deafening, metallic screech. The low-poly simulacra around the table begin to twitch and convulse erratically. Out of the darkness emerges a massive, grotesque, towering monster, officially called the Life Form, and played by a 7'7" actor. It is a malformed, elongated copy of Clark himself, wearing the exact cheap children's pirate costume from his store's humiliating television commercials. Clark tries to step forward, crying, attempting to reason with the entity, but the monster steps forward and fatally bites him in the neck. This scene is absolutely jaw-dropping. The monster is Captain Clark, the literal physical manifestation of Clark's corporate humiliation, his deepest self-hatred, and his capitalized identity. He is literally murdered by the mascot version of himself. It proves a terrifying rule of the backrooms. You cannot negotiate with your own darkness once you've let it grow this large. The things you despise most about your life will eventually consume you if you refuse to leave the labyrinth. 4. The twist ending and the final image. After Clark is killed, Mary flees, spraining her ankle as the environment shifts around her. In a desperate bid for survival, she triggers a gas trap, knocking herself out just as a team of async scientists in bright yellow hazmat suits burst through a door. She wakes up in an async medical facility, being coldly debriefed by a researcher named Phil, played with a brilliant bureaucratic coldness by Mark Duplass. Phil treats her trauma like data points, completely detached from her humanity. But it's the final image of the movie that will haunt me forever. As Phil finishes talking, the camera slowly drifts away from the facility, pushing deeper back into an uncharted sector of the backrooms. The yellow wallpaper gives way to a perfect mirror image replica of Mary's childhood apartment, the exact place her mother used to lock her away. And sitting in the center of the dark room is a mutated, twisted simulacrum of Mary herself. The message is clear, guys. You can leave the backrooms, if you're lucky, but the backrooms never, ever leave you. It already mapped her mind. It's already building her prison. Kane Parsons and Will Sudick didn't just make a horror movie. They rewrote the entire rulebook for how we adapt internet folklore. They took a meme about empty rooms and turned it into a mirror for our deepest, most quiet existential anxieties. But I need to hear from you guys in the comments. What is your interpretation of those 3 angled switches? Do you think async is actively controlling the entities, or are they just as clueless as everyone else? And that final shot of Mary's childhood apartment, how hard did that hit you? Drop your theories down below, smash that like button if you appreciate this deep dive, and make sure to subscribe with notifications turned on. We have a ton of cinema breakdowns coming up that you do not want to miss. Until next time, keep analyzing, keep watching, and remember, watch your step. You never know when the world beneath your feet might just give way. Peace.